For those of you who I may not have met or know yet, I hope I will. Two louder. Need to be louder.
Yes.
How's that? Well, keep reminding me because my voice will drop. It's a preacher's bad habit. I appreciate your coming. I just love being here. St. James taught me how to be a priest. I had already been a priest for 20 years when I arrived, or I thought I was. But St. James taught me what it really means to be a priest. There's a lot of reasons for that, some of which I think are mentioned in the book, although I have trouble remembering what's in the book. I was looking at a review of something yesterday, and I came across this discouraging comment. Most of us like to talk about ourselves, and given the faintest encouragement, we'll say enough to wind up looking like fools when our words appear on the page. That's an uncomfortable truth. But I also know some famous author said, every good writer is always betraying someone. And there's real truth to that. So for those of you who may think you find yourselves in here somewhere, I apologize in advance and tell you I tried to disguise you and hope I succeeded. This book, I never really thought this book would be a book to go out there. I was writing a late life chapter about my life, and I thought it might be interesting to my children when I was dead. But I sent the manuscript to my sister, who's an editor, and she said, "I think you got a book." So that's how it kind of got going, and I'm glad it did. It's turned out I've learned more from since I published it than I did writing it. What I've discovered, and maybe you've already discovered this, is that everything is contingent. Everything is contingent on everything. And that's come as a big surprise to me. You know, I don't have a lot of regrets. And if I have one, it might be that it took me so long to grow into myself. And that's what this book seems now to me to be about, is about growing into myself and maybe helping the reader, if it all works right, to grow into the reader's self, that the reader might say, some aha moment. So I'm grateful to have lived this long. It's still a work in progress, but I'm grateful to have. So I want to start by telling you what I discovered about how I happened to be here, not at St. James, not in San Diego, but on this earth. A rogue hurricane in 1938 is the reason I'm here. My mother was on Fire Island. Some of you may know it's a little sand pit out off the coast of the south coast of Long Island.
Native Long Islander.
Native Long, you know all about it. Well, nobody should have ever built anything on there because it's a barrier island, but they did. And my grandfather was one of those. They had no idea what hurricanes were about in 1938. They hadn't seen one for 100 years. And as the storm grew increasingly threatening, they evacuated their houses, went to the highest house, which was still only just a few feet above sea level. It was nerve-wracking. They lost a lot of houses. Amazingly, because the eye of the storm went directly overhead, they thought the storm was over, and then the second half of the storm hit. It was worse. But nobody died in that group. But my mother was 8 months pregnant, and she caught a terrible hacking cough and cold, which ended up with her giving birth just 1 month premature to a boy who must have had hyaline membrane. He only survived a few minutes. They didn't know what to do in those days with a newborn, especially boy. He died in And his name was to be Garrett. Not long after, she became pregnant again. That turned out to be me. I doubt she would have conceived so soon had the little boy lived. In some weird, palpable sense, Garrett gave his life for me. I have a nephew whose name is Garrett. He read this book. He had never heard that story. One of the things that's been confusing to me ever since I first thought about what I was going to do with my life was what to make of the Christian symbols and story. Do I connect with those? Sometimes. Well, my first year in seminary, I'm reading from the book at this point. First year seminary theology seminar. Each of us made a presentation. Since I arrived at the seminary mostly ignorant of the discipline of theology and a lot of other things, my presentation was a hit or miss, mostly miss, offering of 1960s feel good. Some of you may have been there for that. The following week, John Daniels, a classically trained in Thomistic thought, he had been in Roman Catholic Thomistic schools since he was a little boy, made a brilliant, dense offering in that theology seminar that was incredibly different from mine, the one I'd done the week before. Later, a friend stopped me and said, "You must be pissed at John." Why? Should I be? Well, his paper was a wrecking ball aimed at yours of the previous week. I wasn't well enough schooled to have recognized that. So I asked John why he used his time to attack my paper. "Well, it galls me," he said, "that you people with no training presume to make supposedly scholarly presentations." The pages are too thin. I think I know what comes next. Though I thought him high-handed, I knew he was right. It wouldn't be the last time I felt it over my head and trying to make language about God. The next year, John Lewis was nearly killed by Alabama state troopers crossing Pettus Bridge in Selma with a group protesting discrimination against Black voters. John joined several hundred others from around the country to resume that march to Montgomery. Unlike the others, John stayed in Selma after the march. He lived with a family in the Black ghetto. He tutored children. And every Sunday, he tried, without success, to lead an integrated group to the local Episcopal church. And every week, they were turned away. He returned to Cambridge for his final exams in the spring. And he and I ended up sitting on the dorm steps on a warm spring afternoon where we rehearsed that incident from the previous year's theology class. John apologized. I was arrogant, insensitive. You were also right about my ignorance. You know, Blayney, if I've learned anything living with that wonderful Black family in Selma, it is that recognizing the dignity of everyone trumps so-called superior knowledge every time. We talked for a couple of hours out there that afternoon. John said he was going back to Selma for the summer. "John, you're from New Hampshire. I grew up in the segregated South, the more moderate Mid-South. We knew better than to go to Alabama because those rednecks down there, they think nothing of just shooting anyone they think is a threat to their way of life." "I know that," John said. "Believe it or not, I've actually met a few white people in Selma who want to address racism. What's more," he said, what my life has become since I went there is so wonderful, so different from anything I've ever experienced. Why, even if I thought I might be killed, I think I'd go back anyway." 2 months later, on a Sunday morning on the front page of New York Times, a story about John being shot to death in Alabama when he threw himself between a young black girl and a white deputy sheriff with a shotgun. He was killed instantly. All the theory about racism and violence took on flesh. John's bloody, murdered flesh. Jesus wasn't the last person executed for facing down unjust power. And John's murder wouldn't be the last time I felt over my head, preaching love, refusing to bow to injustice. Ordination wasn't about being a respected member of society. It wasn't about encouraging people to adopt white middle-class manners. It wasn't even about winning converts. My breath caught in my throat as I read about John's murder, just the way it does here now. All these years later, I excused myself from my friends with whom I was having breakfast, went into the bathroom and sobbed. Sobbed for John's brutal death, and equally for the reality that Jesus was calling me to a life radically different from the life I had ever imagined for myself. I realized it meant facing down a large part of me that hoped to be spared more than I thought I was really capable of. Where to find that kind of courage? It's enough to drive a body to prayer. No wonder we clergy so often feed our congregation pap. By the way, I guess this happens every time I do this. That page falls out of the book. You make whatever you make of that. Just one more thing I'm going to read to you because it's something that happened when I was here, and some of you were probably there at the time, and then we can talk. Even infused as we are by incarnation, God hanging out with us always surprises. I rose at 4:30 a.m. Easter morning to walk down to the church for the major festival, when we would see by far the most people of the year. Many we would not see again until the following Easter. I found it especially exciting to try to connect with those unfamiliar with the liturgy and the story behind it, why it matters. I stopped by the coffee shop for a tea to get me started. The waitress was agitated. Someone stole my purse. I know it had to be that homeless guy who was just in here. I commiserated with her and then went on to church. As I went into the nave, walked just over there, I smelled smoke. Following the scent to the side porch, I discovered a man asleep. He'd started a fire from scraps of paper and refuse he'd taken from the trash. Next to him was a woman's purse. He didn't wake right away when I called to him. I nudged him several times before he stirred. He looked confused, hungover. I began stomping out the fire. As he gradually came around, he began apologizing. I just wanted to get warm. Never thought the fire would get so big. How about that purse? I asked. Purse? Well, I have no idea. I suspect you do. I was just in the coffee shop and that waitress told me her purse had been stolen. You want to go back with me and turn it to her, or should I call the cops? No, don't call the cops. I'll go back. We did. The waitress looked angry when she saw us come in. Then she spotted the purse which he was carrying. You son of a bitch. You walked off with my purse. What the hell did you think you were doing? I'm sorry, he said. He said, I didn't really mean to. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, well, maybe you can get the cops to believe that because I sure don't. I don't know if you'll go along with this, I said. I can't blame you if you don't. I told him if he came back with me and apologized and returned your purse, I wouldn't call the cops. I don't know, she said. My license, my money, my credit cards, everything is in that purse. It would have wrecked my life for a month. She checked her purse, looked relieved. Looks like it's all here. The thief looked down at his feet, silent. It's Easter, I said. Jesus was crucified between two thieves who first mocked him, then begged him for forgiveness. Now, I'm not Jesus, and neither are you. I understand, but might you be willing not to call the cops, if only because it's Easter? The thief started quietly weeping. I was hungry, I was cold, I was afraid, I was drunk. There's no excuse, I hate myself for this. The waitress seemed to soften, only because the Reverend asked me to. How about I fund his breakfast? I asked, reaching in my pocket and pulled out a $10 bill. His weeping turned to sobs. Okay, she said. I got to go to church, I said. I have a good breakfast. Next time you need something that bad, you come see me. The sexton was cleaning the porch when I got there. I explained what had happened. He laughed. Guess you don't need to light the traditional first fire of Easter, huh? Your Jesus thief friend took care of that for you. I junked the sermon I'd spent the week preparing for the most significant festival of the year. I preached instead, telling that story about Jesus showing up in the least imaginable form. A homeless man, a thief, inadvertently lighting the Paschal Passover fire. I said, Jesus forgave the thief who was crucified alongside him, even after the thief mocked Jesus for being powerless to save himself. After the service, several told me how moved they were by the story, how it brought a new dimension to their understanding of Jesus. One woman was neither moved nor amused. You had the biggest congregation of the year, eager to hear you preach resurrection, but no, you didn't even prepare a sermon. You told that stupid, scandalous story instead. When God shows up in human flesh, the script has to be rewritten. Well, I could go on. I'll try not to, though. As I said, it's a book about growing into myself. And no place was more help to me than this place in that process. And it's not quite over. So I'll be glad to listen to anybody want to make a speech or ask a question. I'm told this mic can pick you up, so have at it. Yeah.
Why did you choose your title?
Thanks for reminding me. I meant to mention that. The title, for those of you who haven't seen it, is I Reserve the Right to be Terrified. By the way, there are books back there if you want to buy one. They're $20. I once asked a therapist, I said, do you ever look forward to dying as a relief from all this we have to put up with here? Oh, hell yes, he said, but I reserve the right to be terrified. I said, oh, that's the title of my book. You just gave me my title. I think that's kind of where we live, you know? It's hard. Life's hard. It's a bitch, being here. It's great, too. And it will be over, and we'll be a friend of ours, a good friend, somebody we cared, loved a lot, died last summer in Vermont. And I've heard more than one of her friends say, Lois doesn't have to worry about getting new tires. She doesn't. So there's relief, but it's also terrifying to think that we're going to die. So that's how that's where the title came from, and in a way, I suppose it's what the book is about. In a sense, is about that tension between the excitement and the terror, Anyway, yeah, yes,
Is
sir.
there a most terrifying place that you've been to on earth?
No more terrifying than where I'm standing right now. That's a good question. Yeah, when I was a teenager, my friend, despite what I just read to you in the book, my friends and I would sometimes drive down into the deeper South, and just for the hell of it. And we had some pretty hairy adventures because we were quickly picked off as voyeurs, who didn't belong there. So that could, yes.
Did you ever have any further contact with the homeless gentleman you just described?
Well, that's a good question. Those of you who have, Christina, I'm sure has experienced this, that churches are places that homeless people feel they can come to. And I saw a lot of homeless people, and I'm sure they do still. I know they do. They still have the lunches that they give to people to take to homeless people. Did I see him again? I don't remember whether I saw him again. The homeless person I remember the best is a guy who I used to see around all the time. He was always kind of well turned out, and he used to go in the stores along here, and he would carry a broom with him, and he'd say, "Would you like me to sweep out your entrance?" And he would do that, and they would give him some money, and he did fairly well. Well, the La Jolla Light wrote a story about him, and it went national, the story. And his father, who thought he was dead, saw the story, and he came. And I remember coming into the office one day, and this guy, who I'd gotten to know pretty well over the years, he and his father were sitting there. And he introduced me to his father, and we talked for a while. And his father said, "He's going to come home with me. He's going to come home." I forget where they lived. I think Indiana, maybe. So they left. And about 2 weeks later, I saw this guy sweeping out, And I said, "I thought you went home." He said, "This is home." It's a confusing issue to me, and shameful, it's awful running to people, and you just don't know what you might do. But did I see that guy? And I don't know. Yes.
What would keep you from being terrified?
What would keep me?
What would keep you?
Well, lots of things keep me from being terrified. The party line, and I'm a subscriber to it by and large, is that that God can be trusted with us in life and in death. And I believe that. But my ego doesn't want to believe that. My ego says, "Hang on tight, man." But the other part of me that really trusts God I don't know what it was like before I was born, and I don't necessarily expect to have any idea what it's like after I die. But I think somebody asked me once, how you decide what makes you think somebody's a believer or not a believer? And I said, well, after a long life, you ask the person, "Were you glad you were here, or would you just soon have skipped it?" He says, "I'm pretty glad I got to be here." I said, "You're a believer, man." And that's, how do you stop? Most of the time I'm not terrified. But a couple of weeks ago, my blood pressure went like that and scared me. I went to urgent care. And the guy said, the doctor said, "Why'd you come here?" I said, "I thought I was going to have a stroke." He said, "Why'd you think you were going to have a stroke?" I said, "Because my blood pressure was so high." He said, "You're not going to have a stroke." He said, your blood pressure is going to go back down. He said, I was sick. I had a cold, and I was terrified. So yeah, it comes and goes, and I don't think it's anything terrible about being terrified. That's kind of part of what we do. I'm also excited about a lot of things. Yeah. Sure.
What's the origin of the issue?
Oh, the picture. Everybody thinks that's me. It isn't. Swimming with the sharks. And by the way, they're leopard sharks. And I once said to our daughter Louise, who's a marine biologist, well, it's fun to swim with the leopard sharks because they don't have any teeth. They're harmless. She said, "Oh hell, they got teeth." I said, "I never knew that." But she said they're ground feeders, so they don't usually take flesh, off you. Anyway, this picture appeared in the newspaper one day, and Robert Thiel, who some of you may know, looked at that picture and he called his father. He said, "Dad, that's you." And his father hadn't seen the paper. He went and got the paper. He said, "Yeah, it sure is." Lacey, my wife, worked for Ross Thiel and Son for 25 years. And John Thiel was then the principal. Now it's Elizabeth, his daughter. And he loved to ocean swim. And I agree. There's nothing more fun, especially if there are people from off on the beach, to just dive into a wave that's covered with leopard sharks. Then they say, "Oh my God." But so we went searching around for who took this picture, and we never came up with anything. So finally, what we did, and if you know, don't tell, okay? It says cover photo used with the permission of John Thiel, who's been dead now for about 10 years. But that's where the picture I sent the publisher about 5 or 6 pictures, and as soon as she saw this one, she said, "That's the cover." By the way, Rebecca, who I'm sorry is leaving, because I'll miss Rebecca. She's a great priest and person. Did one of the blurbs on the back of this for me, which I greatly appreciate. Really sweet, nice. Yeah, Paula.
Did you come to decide to write it in the format, which I found very pleasing? It was almost like you had a thought and you wrote it. And it sort of made the book very easy to pick up, read the thought, think about it. And back.
Well, I think it's kind of the way my mind works. In what in biblical studies they call pericopes, which are basically little stories. And I mean, I don't want to flatter myself by saying this, but that's the way Jesus taught. He told stories, and then he kind of left you to figure out why he told you that story. And I was just, as I said at the beginning, I was just wanting to kind of write down some stuff. As some of you know, I've written several novels, and that was fun. But I thought, I don't know if I've got another novel in me, but I'm just going to write down a bunch of stuff, and I'll leave it for whoever might want to read it. But that's the way it came out. I just sat down. This is about 4 years of writing that, sporadically, and I would give up on it and say then I'd come back to it. And it wasn't until my sister, who I really respect her judgment, and then a publisher editor said, no, I think this is a book. I think you should do this book. So I did. And here it is. Yes.
Back to the first story that made me cry, your friend John.
Yes.
Anything ever happened in the judicial system?
Oh, God, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. The man who shot him went to trial in Alabama. And I don't know if I ought to even tell you this, but the defense introduced John's underwear into evidence, which, as any of you know, when somebody dies suddenly, violently, everything goes. And he introduced his underwear to prove that John was a pervert who needed to be killed. And he was acquitted of justifiable homicide. The dean of our seminary went down there right after that to meet with the bishop of the Diocese of Alabama. And they had quite a, those were wild days. And John, John was not my closest friend, nor I his. He was a different kind of guy. I worried about John because he didn't suffer fools gladly, as you could tell from that story. I worried about him having encounters with other people. He actually wasn't killed in Selma. He was killed in Lowndes County. With Stokely Carmichael was kind of overseeing John in those days, trying to protect him because he thought John was reckless. And Stokely said, "Now, John, don't go to Lowndes County. Stay out of Lowndes County. You just don't want to go there." Well, John went with a Roman Catholic priest named Richard Morrisroe and two young Black girls. What they had been doing was they had been registering voters. And they went, they were immediately arrested as soon as they arrived in this town. And they were in jail for overnight. And then they sent words that they needed help. Somebody was going to come and bail them out and take care of them. And the jailer, or whoever it was, came and said, "You're free to go." And John said, "Wait a minute, we're not." He said, "You're free to go. Go." They went next door to a bottle store, just a little, mom and pop bottle store. And the Black girl, who, by the way, is an Episcopal priest today, was ahead of John, and behind John was Richard Morrisroe, the Roman Catholic priest, and then another young Black girl behind him. And when they got to the top step of the store, the deputy sheriff kicked the door open, and he said something, I don't know if it's in the record somewhere, and just fired. Didn't ask any question or anything. And when John saw him kick the door open, he pushed the little girl in front of him off the porch and took the full, and he fired a second time, and Richard Morrisroe was hit, the priest. He survived. It's hard. It's really hard. I think about John all the time. Yeah. You're a patient group. Sir.
For those of us who don't know you well, can you tell a story of how you got there, where you were, how you got here,
Sure.
where you are now?
Sure. I was rector of a parish in one of the western suburbs of Boston, Dedham, and I'd been there for 10 years when they decided they were going to give me a sabbatical, which was great. Lacey and I had recently married. We were both divorced. That was a whole new idea for the Episcopal Church in those days, that a parish priest could actually get divorced and not get kicked out. It had just happened a couple of years before we got married. Anyway, it was hairy. The church, it was a nice little suburban parish, great people. It was an old land grant from the Crown, so people have been there a long time. So, and they really tried hard, but my former wife was still a member of the congregation. It was very complicated. Anyway, they gave us a sabbatical. Lacey and I, we thought we might go to Vermont, to our place in Vermont. And then our bishop came to talk to us, and he said he had just been to Zimbabwe, where the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts had formed a companion relationship with 3 dioceses in Zimbabwe. And he talked about his experience. John was the most kind of rational, he was a real mentor to me, rational kind of person that I respected, admired. He crossed all the right T's and dots, the eyes. But while he talked about this, his eyes rolled up in his head like he was having an ecstatic experience. Later that afternoon, Lacey and I were raking leaves out in the yard, and Lacey said, "What if we didn't go to Vermont? What if we went to Zimbabwe?" I said, "What?" Well, I went inside and called the guy at the diocese who was in charge of that. And he said, "Oh, we might be able to make that happen." Well, we did. So we went with 2 of our 5 children. We went in January. So we went in the height of their summer. They're in the Southern Hemisphere. We ended up in a little place, a little rural community that was all about sugar cane growing. And it was quite a fantastic experience for us. Came back, the bishop, when I agreed to take the sabbatical, he called to congratulate me for accepting the sabbatical. I said, "Are you kidding? Who wouldn't?" He said, "Any smart person wouldn't." Because what's going to happen is you're going to have experiences that they haven't had, and they're not going to be really interested in your experiences. And they're going to have experiences in that time that you didn't have, and you're not going to be really interested in that either. What's more, they're going to find they get along pretty well without you. And that all turned out to be true. So anyway, it took a couple of years to kind of sort all that out. And then a group of people out of the blue showed up at our place from here and said, we need to come up with somebody soon, because we've been at this for 1.5 years and we're going to get lynched if we don't come up with a. So that was me. We came out and that was a happy. And then I was here for almost 10 years, and then the church pension fund, trying to make room for people like Christina, they said, we'll make it possible for somebody who's been a priest for 30 years and is at least 50 years old to retire with full benefits. So we can clear out some of this dead wood out of these nice places. And I've been so eager to try writing full time. That's what I really, really want to do. I did a lot of writing when I was a parish priest, and some of it was sermons and some of it was newsletters, and people would say to me about a sermon, "What the hell were you talking about?" I said, "Oh, I was hoping you'd tell me." So anyway, we ended up here, and it was a really happy thing. And then when I retired, Lacey was still working at Ross Steel, so she was going. We said, "Well, where are we going to live?" We said, "Well, we have a nice old farmhouse in Vermont. I guess that's where we live." So we went back, but then winter came, and we had wrecked ourselves for Vermont winter. So ever since then, we've come back for wintertime. We rent a place here. We keep moving from place to place as it works out. And that's been a really happy thing for us. We have 2 children in the West, one in Portland, one in the state of Washington, and then 3 children in New England. So we get to see them here and there, but not as much as we'd really like to. Does that answer the question you asked? Yeah. So I don't know if it'd be. I'd love to take more questions if you have them. I have another thing I can quickly read if you'd like. It's people often ask me why I decided to be a priest, and if I'm honest with them, in other words, if they're not part of the hierarchy, I tell this story. Birdie, my beagle, I was 8 years old. I was teaching Birdie to heel. Beagles are wonderful dogs, but they're not the smartest dogs. But he was gradually catching on. And I finally got to the point where I thought he could do a little distance. So I went across there and told Birdie to stay there. And when I got there, I said, "Heel, Birdie, come." And he ran. And as he ran across the road, a car came around the corner and crushed him. Gertrude, this is Charlotte, North Carolina. Gertrude, our maid, came running out and pulled me off the bloody corpse, carried me inside, went back, scraped Bertie off the road, and called Mr. Ryder, our parish minister. You got to come right now. He spent the afternoon with Gertrude and me. The three of us. I don't know where my mother was, but she wasn't there when that happened. I asked him if Bertie would go to heaven. Do you love Bertie? He asked. Yeah. Of course, yeah. Your love for Bertie and Bertie's love for you means you'll never be separated. You'll always be together. Even after you both die, you'll be together. Nothing can kill the love that joins you together. Now that would be the answer. I guess that'd be a better answer to your question about how do you keep from being terrified. That story is lodged in a place in me that endures. The stuff from which vocations are formed, at least mine was, formed by somebody coming to care about me at 8 years old when I thought nothing could ever matter again. And that minister was a big mentor to me over the years. When I was in college and starting to think about that I might do this, I found out where he was, and I went and spent the weekend at his place, which must have been a nuisance to him because he was a parish minister. He loved to drink, and I did too in those days. And we sat up most of the night, probably drinking bourbon. And about 3 a.m., it couldn't have been that late. He wouldn't have let it. I said, I think I ought to go to seminary. Oh my God, he said, I thought you'd never get there. and that was, and then I had to jump through a lot of hoops. Yeah, Christine will tell you about that if you want to know. I didn't tell in those days they had a thing called the Board of Examining Chaplains, and you had to pass through that hoop to get to. I don't think you had to do that to go to seminary, although you may have, but you certainly had to before ordination. And these were, respected, stiff, upper lip, uptight leaders of the diocese. Tell us about your experience. Well, I didn't tell them about Bertie. I told them about all the smart theologians I'd read, and they seemed to think that was a good idea. But the truth is, it's what makes its way straight into your heart that decides your vocation. How you're gonna spend your life energy. And I think everybody's got a vocation. I mean, that's just what it means to be human. You start to discover what you're doing here and why. The why is an impossible question, but you do have a vocation. You do have we're not just blobs here. You done? Yes.
Some of us are eager to buy your book.
Do that.
How do we go about this?
Well, you go to Lacey. Lacey's right there with books, and I'm happy to sign it if you'd like. Yeah. So yeah, please. That's. I like that. It's a small publishing house in Brattleboro, Vermont, called, as you won't be surprised, called Green Writers Press, Green Place Books. They're very big environmental types, and and good people, and they publish some interesting stuff. And I'm grateful to them for doing this one. So yeah, happy to have you.
We wanted to thank you for sharing with us and bringing your book and your wisdom and sharing about your time while you were here at St. James.
Thank you.
You're such a treasure to our community.
Well, thank you. Well,
Thank you.
St. James is a treasure to me, I tell you that. Thank you. Thank you, Christina, very much.